Welcome to the complete Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list. The goal of this video is to rank every recognized strategy in Yu-Gi-Oh! As they are for this current TCG format. Decks are tiered on a scale of 1 to 10. 0 is not a deck, and 10 means dominating the format and practically invalidating every other deck. Every archetype on this list represents the strongest variant of that deck. For example, Tri-Brigade would be ranked as Spright Tri-Brigade because that is the best variant of the deck. However, Spright on the list would be ranked as something closer to a generic engine due to the sheer variety of how many topping lists there are. This is the tier list for the 2022 November-December format, updated from the last tier list in July of 2022, covering Despia or engine format. This new format has seen power creep from the set power of the elements and Magnificent Mavens, redefining what it takes to be a meta deck. Since the best decks this format can play through an insane level of disruptions, cards like Dark Ruler No More, Super Polymerization, and Forbidden Droplet have become more popular because they can just ignore your opponent's end board. A lot of decks this format have built-in hand traps, such as Tearlaments, or the decks have the ability to search and special summon on an unprecedented level, like Sprites and also Tearlaments. This list has been very awkward to make. Since Tearlaments completely dominate every competitive event, it's a lot harder to find info for other decks. Some decks, despite having very good matchups against most decks, cannot exist competitively in the same format as Tearlaments. The pre-tier format featured almost all of the dominating decks from the past few formats, but to a more rogue degree than before. Events would often have topping results wildly different from each other, where some decks won't even show up despite dominating previous events. A lot of lists for decks will be pulled from this time period, as it's the only way to get good deck lists, since most tournament results just kinda end up looking like this. How decks are rated. Decks this format are rated on their ability to handle Tearlaments, as well as other quality requirements. My previous requirements for decks to have topped recently to make it in Tier 7 has been downshifted in importance due to the minimal number of unique tops this format. Tier 10 is Tier Tier. Tier 9 are decks with frequent tops that can consistently compete with Tearlaments. Tier 8 is for weak meta. These are decks that can competitively keep up with every other deck in Tier 9 through 8, but can't consistently handle Tearlaments or haven't been remotely popular to this format. Tier 7 is Strong Rogue, and Tier 6 is Weak Rogue. In these tiers, the importance of the Tearlament matchup is lessened, but won't go away completely. Without further ado, let's get into Tearlament format. Tearlaments are without a doubt the best deck this format. Since every card in this deck has either a strong on-hand effect or on-field effect, combined with the ability to fusion summon when they're sent to the grave, every main deck monster effectively needs to be hand-trapped twice, letting the deck play through quite a lot of hand traps. The deck's field spell is a crazy do-everything card for the deck. Tearlaments are able to make a variety of powerful inboards due to just how many times the deck can special summon. Everything from Apollosa to Abyss Dweller to Predaplant Dragostapelia, and even to topologic plays. The deck also has a searchable trap that's a reusable monster effect negate. If you've never seen this deck in action, think about what if Lightsworn just had no bricks, every card was better Lightsworn Wolf, and every card was also Charge of the Light Brigade. Tiers have a ton of variants, but tiers work extremely well with the Ishizu engine. Basically a method to mill even more cards and then shuffle cards back from either grave, prevent deck out, or to counteract your opponent's plays. Since Ishizu mills trigger whenever they're sent to the graveyard, this combined with Havness or Herald of the Orange Light means going full combo on the opponent's turn. I cannot overstate how overpowered this is when compared to other decks in the game right now. Some people claim that a one-deck format is fun due to the skill-based mirrored matches, but I prefer the creativity that comes from the other 350 decks in the game. Here's a first place list from ICS Costa Rica. This list was by Jesse Cotton. Ignore the Herald that's been limited. This list is still practically at full powered. The only real problem with tiers is their vulnerability to anti-graveyard cards like Abyss Dweller and Dimension Shifter, which completely shuts down the deck. Recently, with the unlimiting of Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos, hurt too. However, Tearlaments do have a solid backup plan to this. They can make Baguska. Plan B is always an option. Now into Tier 9. Sprites live by the simple philosophy.
Another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. And another one.
Basically, by spamming out level 2 monsters, this deck can make a variety of powerful inboards to handle whatever situation the deck finds itself in. What makes this deck effective is the large number of starters in the engine. Spright Jet, Spright Blue, and Spright Starter are all practically full combo and don't take away your normal summon. A Spright inboard can make use of anything from Totally Awesome to number 65 Gen Buster to literally any Link 2 or Rank 2 XYZ. Spright are one of the most splashable decks this format. The two most popular engines competitively are Bystial and Nimble. Bystial will get their own section later, and Nimble's function as an extremely free engine to get materials on the field. Basically, Nimble Angler combos with Spright Sprint for a ridiculously free rank 2, and the other Nimble monster gives a solid option for a normal summon. Here's a first place list from a WCQ regional by Din Kang Pham. We can see in this list just how sprites are able to make use of the card Dimensional Shifter, even though they have graveyard combos. It's 50-50, showing how powerful sprites are, and how devastatingly tough to handle Tearlaments are. This list also features the end of Anubis, which is one of the most spicy techs I've seen in a tournament in a while. Floowandereeze have made themselves known as one of the best meta decks. Honestly, not a lot has changed with this deck, but the meta definitely has changed around it. This deck's ability to play around banished cards like Dimension Shifter and Dimensional Fisher give it such solid presence in the game. And Floowandereeze still have the crazy ability to play around hand traps and can recur value like crazy. Floowandereeze have access to powerful blowout cards like Harpy's Featherstorm and Barrier Statue of the Storm Winds. With Macrocosmos and Dimensional Fisher back in the game, this deck's position on the meta is sure to get a bit stronger. At the time of writing this, I don't have a list with the updated ban list, but I'll throw one in post. I'm sure it'll be a great list with a great profile linked in the description. Oh yeah, that reminds me. In these videos, I link every profile for the deck list, if I can find it. It's a great way to go more in depth on a deck, and hear from other people about the decks that aren't just me. Bystial are a weird deck to rank. As an engine, they're extremely popular and show up in a lot of lists. I would count the larger engines hand trap packages as a Bystial hybrid list for the purposes of this tier list. What Bystial do is DD Chrome, and then get Dragon and Branded synergy. Bystial spam the board with free monsters from doing something you'd run hand traps for anyway. Honestly, Bystial just a very simple engine that's extremely useful. We've already seen these cards in action, and we will see these throughout the tier list. There's not a specific deck list for Bystial, but we will see the dramatic impact Bystials have had on Dragon archetypes as a whole, even if they're not the most meta builds of Bystials. Welcome to Tier 8. Every deck has some decent options against Tearlaments, but are just a little too inconsistent or lack enough punch to keep up quite as well with the meta. Runick are a spell-based control deck all about banishing your opponent's deck and recurring value with their field spell. Runick kept up with the meta before with Mystic Mine, but now Runick is stuck with the classic pairing of Spright, as the Runick field spell Searcher fusion is a level 2. Here's a top 64 YCS list by Nico Schleilerkamp. I'm gonna be butchering so many names throughout this, I'm sorry. What makes the Runick engine so good is banishing cards right off the top of the deck. What this does is remove potentially important combo pieces right out of the opponent's deck, and the variety of control effects used to get it cover any possible thing you'd need. From spell destruction, monster negates, monster removal, anti-searching cards, and all sorts of other crazy stuff. Alright, the two really wonky placements on the tier list are this one and the next one. I love to have more data to back up these choices, but due to how little anything not the above decks top, it's very awkward to fight over. Dracoslayer are a pendulum archetype, all about moving cards around the pendulum scales to search more cards, making a gigantic board in the process. What makes this deck so cool is they combine the archetypes of Ignite, Magispector, and Dynamist together, meaning this deck not only synergizes with standard Pendulum Magicians, but also practically every other Pendulum deck in existence, giving this deck resistance to hand trap disruption. This deck plays by basically doing a loop that keeps adding in new cards from the deck. The two biggest disruption points in the deck are being able to search any field spell with the effect of Majesty Pegasus and bringing out a Morphage Sloth to lock out the opponent's extra deck. Here's a second place list by Kiza D from a WCQ regional. This list shows how wacky Dracoslayers are. It takes a bunch of different pendulum archetypes and just throws the kitchen sink at the opponent. It's a bit of a meme here. This deck list is extremely well thought out, but it does kind of look like you slapped every pendulum archetype into a blender and hit burr. A key notable play in this list is World Sea Dragon Zealantis, because a lot of the important cards in this deck are not once per turn. Naturia and Vernusylph combined with Ishizu form a really unique meta deck all about using a simple Naturia combo for access to insane disruptions like Naturia Beast and any rank 4, all while supporting the strategy with Vernusylph cards for more disruptions and extra XYZ plays. This deck gets its strength by being able to assemble boards to counter meta decks. Abyss Streller combined with the Ishizu cards screw over Tearlament. Naturia Beast and Baron de Fleur can stop Floowandereeze outright. While this deck is not a perfect solution to the current meta, it is a very strong deck. Here is a version of the deck without the Vernusylph engine, having it instead replaced by Bystial and Runick. This build is quite powerful, and opts for a slower control playstyle with Runicks, but more than makes up for it with the utility gained from the new engine. This is the top 64 YCS list by Din Kabui. Here's another build of the deck. It's a top 8 WCQ list by Robert McCallum. Much like the other one, this one is super specialized to go up against Tearlament. Notice the use of Gravekeeper's Trap as an anti-tier floodgate option. Exosister are one of the decks able to play around Dimensional Shifter and Dimensional Barrier. As such, they have a good baseline matchup against tiers. The deck strategy is set up to make its mini XYZ monsters for disruptions on the opponent's turn. Exosister Martha is a free XYZ starter, or an extender depending on what you need. The deck has a ton of searchability and disruptions, but it struggles a bit with going second, and can struggle against matchups like Floowandereeze. Here's a first place WCQ list by Jose Alzamora. This list makes use of a wide variety of staple cards to give it flexibility to handle not just Tearlaments, but other meta decks as well. Branded are a fusion combo deck, notoriously being able to pull out any combo out of the deck with Branded Fusion. Branded were the best deck not too long ago. Despite being power crept out by Tearlaments and Spright, Despia are still holding on somehow, mostly because of Bystials being able to extend Despia plays and provide better hand traps. Branded have a ton of solid combos, such as Raw Lock, Branded at High Spirits, and the classic Guardian Chimera. This deck has a combo for almost every situation. The biggest issues with Branded is that the same cards that hurt Tearlaments also hurt Branded to an extent, making the deck questionable to run. Here's a top 8 WCQ list by Green 176. Swordsoul Tenyi are still the very powerful hand trap resistant Worm Synchro deck they've always been. This deck has changed relatively little in the last few formats, still outputting powerful boards like Baron de Fleur and Chixao, as well as abusing the Yangzing extra deck shenanigans for extra plays. Perhaps the most interesting part of this deck's change strategy is adopting Dimensional Shifter and Dimensional Fissure into the main strategy, despite how much these cards hurt Swordsoul Tenyi's strategy. Tearlaments are just that impactful. Here's a top 8 WCQ regional list by Jiaming T. With Recital Starling back to 2 in the TCG, Lyrilusc are now significantly stronger in the metagame. With Starling at 1, the deck was already a viable rogue option. Being able to search DD Crow counts for a lot in today's game environment. Before the ban list, the deck was already sporadically topping. Now the deck has easy access to Utopic Draco in its combos. Tri-Brigade are now strongest with Lyrilusc in my opinion, so they will be listed next to each other for the tier list. Here's an older top 32 YCS list from Yuri Santos, just to give some idea of the deck structure, even if it's not perfectly up to date. Rikka Sunavalon is the best plant-type deck in the game at the moment. That might not hold up in future, but for now, this deck is nuts. Rikka Sunavalon have 3 to 5 disruption inboards that they can get to with 1 or 2 cards in hand. This deck has access to Cactus Bouncer for a complete floodgate, and this deck can play around blowouts like Dark Ruler no more. However, the deck is, in my opinion, held up mainly by 2 things. First, tributing your opponent's monsters as cost, and second, most players do not understand how the deck works. In tier format, this deck has a variety of options to handle the meta. The deck can run D-Shifter and Dimensional Fissure, even if they are suboptimal for the Rikka strategy. Here's a very solid WCQ top 8 list by Eric. Danger are still a very solid engine. Danger Tearlaments is still an insanely powerful deck, having a lot of synergy, even if it's not the most optimal build of Tearlaments. Curious being banned hurt this strategy a bit. Here's an older list making use of a Scareclaw engine. This was a YCS top 16 list by Daniel Stella. Definitely a bit dated, but still very strong. Rockets or Dragon Link are a set of dragon cards that all synergize together for crazy combos. One dragon card pulls out another, and another, building up the crazy inboards with any number of Link shenanigans, Borreload dragons, or more recently, XYZ disruptions. Dragon Link got a dramatic boost in power because of the Bystial package, effectively getting hand traps that search out combo pieces. Here's the top 8 WCQ regional list by Ironman Dos Santos. This list made use of 4 archetype engines. This is also notable for being one of the few lists on the tier list opting to take the route of more engines equal less bricks. Madolche are a 1-card XYZ OTK combo deck that synergize very well with new archetypes like Ishizu and Vernusylph. As these new engines are Earth type, they have perfect synergy, giving the deck a ton of options for playing second or making additional XYZ disruptions. And of course, Tiramisu is still one of the best removal cards in the entire game. Here's the top 32 YCS list by Herman Hansen. I've demoted the Herald variants away from the Drytron Hivemine, as they're just not popular or successful enough to justify putting them this high, especially with Herald being limited. Drytron are still very powerful, being able to output large inboards, with cards like Vanity's Ruler, Draconis, and Apollosa. Here's a first place remote duel list by Keylor Porus. Mathmech and Ignister are 2 Cyberse combo decks that build massive boards off of 1 or 2 card combos. Ignister are able to make a massive Towers monster, and Decode Talker Heat Soul for value, and field presence. While Mathmech can search any level 4 monster, or spell and trap card in the game, they can also make Trishula on the opponent's turn. One of the biggest downsides to both of these strategies is how straightforward each of them are. As such, they're very powerful, but disruptible. This deck has some of the easiest OTKs in the game, thanks to access code Talker and update Jammer. Mathmech haven't been performing nearly as well as the previous format, because the Ishizu cards are serious disruption for their plays, as this deck needs control of their graveyard for cards like Super Factorial or Splash Mage to work. Here's an older hybrid list for Mathmech at Ignister. It's a second place YCS list by Marcos Lorenzo. And here's a pure Mathmech list. It made top 64 at YCS Utrecht. It made top 64 at a YCS. If you've been liking this tier list so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. Part 2 of this video is coming out as soon as I can figure out how to put Valiance into words. If you want to see how the modern format has affected casual Yu-Gi-Oh!, make sure you're subscribed so you can see when that comes out. Decks in Tier 7 almost certainly struggle a bit with one or more aspects of the current meta. These aren't bad, but definitely aren't where they used to be. I am moving a lot of decks in Tier 7 out of weak meta due to lack of results. The Punk and Adventure engines haven't been doing great lately, and have definitely been forced out of the metagame by aggressive power creep. These are still very strong engines, but the meta just has better options. ABC and Theron are being kicked out just barely. They don't play nice with a lot of popular decks and text this format. Eldritch, Invoked, and Shaddoll have also been kicked out. They don't do enough to keep up with the meta. For Shaddoll and Invoked, they also lose the popular cards like Dark Ruler and Forbidden Droplets, not to mention the Bystial engine or Dimensional Shifter. But also in this format, Infinite Impermanence is extremely popular, and Evenly Matched is a popular tech. All of this adds up to really hurt these decks. Virtual Worlds and Evil Twin have been kicked out for both not getting enough results and not making the best inboards, even with the Evil Twin Spright hybrid. Sky Strikers are still a relevant rogue deck, but they're nowhere near as good as they were when Mystic Mine was at 3. Sky Striker Linkage is another starter which helped the deck a lot, but the deck has just fallen out of the meta into rogue. Maybe they'll end up decent by the time all of their new support releases. I hope all of you degenerates get what you're looking for. I've always claimed that Dragonmaid are a good deck, and it appeals Bystial have given them an edge to start taking some top spots. Dragonmaid decks focus around abusing Shio, and just enough Dragonlink cards and engines to make a very powerful board. The Bystial engine gives them a way to interact on the opponent's turn while actively progressing the strategy of Dragonmaids. Here's a top 8 list from a WCQ regional by Moonsong. Libromancers are such a solid engine. It's just a shame they're locked into needing a ritual archetype. The deck can give a free XYZ, or 3 free link materials, plus recursion if you're a ritual deck. They give easy setup for an artifact Dagda, and as such can push out some very powerful inboards. The list I'm showing you here isn't the best list at all, but I haven't been able to show off any of my lists this video, so here's my list for Libromancer. It's Necros, Libromancer, Dogmatica. This list is very solid, but incredibly janky to play. Have fun. Cyberse or Code Talker is a deck I kinda missed out on the first run through the tier list. The goal is simple. Spam out as many Cyberse type monsters as possible to set up a few key negates combined with extra linking, or to just OTK your opponent out immediately. This deck has a surprisingly solid amount of starters, and even got new support with the card linking to the Vrains. This is one of those decks that will get support forever, but it just lacks the easy to make disruptions it needs to really see a higher meta presence. Here's a significantly older list by Matthew P. from a remote duel event. You can see the beginnings of the Mathmech core being a competitive force here. Reek Rogue can best be described as a combination of good legacy decks, meta on release archetypes, and personal copium. These decks are good and have enough of a competitive edge to keep them out of casual, but in a tier 0 format, it's very questionable how valid these decks are. Here are some decks that have been moved from tier 7 into tier 6 to reflect the overall power creep of the game. Six Samurai and Unchained are two very powerful decks with a few key weaknesses. With how explosive combos are in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, Six Samurai now aren't anywhere near as special as they once were, and Unchained are just too inconsistent to justify being placed into tier 7. Odd Eyes and Zephyr have been moved down by just not offering enough, especially when compared to Dracoslayer. These show pendulum strategies that just lack the utility and resilience to play in modern games. Cyber Dragon have been moved down as their going second capabilities get even worse in the modern format. This deck is also significantly hit by Bystials. None of these decks mentioned here have topped recently. This is a good signal that their time is over, at least for now. Marincess are a Link Water combo deck that has a few powerful tools going for it. Going first, they have 3 options. Marincess Aqua Argonaut for a ton of spell negates. Totally Awesome for an Omni Negate, or Abyss Dweller for stopping any graveyard strategy. You do have more options, but these 3 cover answers to every meta deck, even if subpar. The deck's engines are very light, meaning hand traps and techs have a ton of space in the main deck. If this deck was a bit better at playing through hand traps and board breakers, it might be a bit higher on the list. But as it is now, it's stuck in weak rogue. Here's an older list by Gabriel GH. This list made top 32 out of YCS. Labrynth are the new best trap deck. Being able to do powerful plays such as recycling blowout traps, like Torrential Tribute and Ice Dragon's Prison, while getting value for doing so. Ariane and Ariana, the Labrynth Servants, are two insanely powerful value engines that can force out a win in any grind game. The deck is very fun and powerful, but requires a good player and deck builder to be used properly. And of course, as a trap deck, Labrynth really need to go first. Originally I had a joke that Crystal Beast will stay the same in the tier list, because honestly, I overvalued them the first time, and the new support just justified my previous placement. But they've done really well all things considered, and topped a few regionals pre-Tearlament. Crystal Beast will be moved up in the tier 6. If they continue to get results, they will be moved a bit higher. Honestly, I'm just surprised by how much better they got with the new support. While the deck always had powerful searcher cards, such as Crystal Bond and Rainbow Bridge, the deck now has payoffs, with Crystal Miracle and with Rainbow Bridge of Salvation being able to search any field spell. From Necro Valley to Zombie World, this gives Crystal Beast a genuine edge. Here's a topping list from James M. from a WCQ regional. While it is pre-ban list thanks to the Mystic Mine, this list is super optimized to fit in 9 hand traps and an insane amount of consistency boosters. Fur Hire are still out here being a surprisingly competent deck that no one plays because you have to out yourself as a furry. The deck has recently gotten several new support cards that provide crazy extenders and searchers, meaning the deck's main combo lines are really good. The 2 to 3 negate boards the deck would make previously are now a guarantee, on top of something like Apollosa. This deck still can struggle against hand traps quite a bit if the build isn't right, and the deck does need its graveyard for its combos, so this current meta isn't exactly great for it. Vampires are still a decent zombie deck, perhaps benefiting the most from the new zombie support, outside of maybe Zombie World. Vampire Ghost is an amazing 1-card starter, setting up the deck's free searchers. The deck can very easily set up a full Zombie World and make 1 or 2 negates consistently. The deck has access to the stupid Shiranui trap, since the Mayakashi links are generic. You'll get more into that Copium trap a bit later. The deck's problems are still the same since the first updated wave of support. A lot of this deck's better combos come from manipulating monsters already in your opponent's graveyard. This might seem like a blessing in Tearlament format, but it is definitely not. Plus, you have all the anti-graveyard cards this format. This all comes together to force an otherwise very solid deck to not really have a good spot in the metagame. Scareclaw are a new addition to the tier list. Scareclaw are a very straightforward link spam deck with a ton of searchability and free special summons. Every monster special summons himself for free, and the link monster searches any spell. Honestly, this deck just seems like a newer version of Crusadia. At a glance, it's hard to tell their gameplay apart. Scareclaw have easy access to OTKs and plays nice with outside engines, like Adventure or really anything. I've seen builds ranging from pairing it with Tri-Brigade to Tearlaments. Here's the top CSM list by Chaos Lock. You can see how the Scareclaw engine works by just running 3 copies of each of the monsters to spam out. It's such a massive strength to have such a small core and be able to run a tons of techs and support options. Sharks are a surprisingly powerful water rank 4 spam deck, being able to easily make boards with multi-totally awesomes, Abyss Dweller, and the underrated Stealth Kraken. At its core, this deck usually consists of around 20 water monsters that special summon themselves out for free, and most of them are able to search and special summon out other monsters for free. All around, it's a very underrated and powerful deck. What's funnier about this is that a lot of sharks also summon themselves right back out from the graveyard for extensions and recovery plays. If I had to guess, the reason it's not popular is probably due to its incredibly straightforward playstyle, and it's not traditionally popular art. Maybe Tearlaments have something to do with this too. They usually do. Here's the top 16 CSM list by Creed22. It leans very heavily into special summon fodder, but it runs just enough hand traps and staple cards to keep up with the meta. Dark World got a lot of new stuff from the recent structure deck. Not only pieces that bring up Dark World's notoriously insane combos to modern standards, but also new ways to play around hand traps. Perhaps the funniest disruption this deck can make is with the fusion monster Grapha Dragon Overlord of Dark World, which can replace an opponent's effect with making your opponent forcing you to discard one. This combined with Neko Main King can just become a turn skip combo. The deck has similar combo synergy with cards such as the Danger Engine or Mass Change for 2 very powerful disruptions. However, this deck falls victim to the most recent ban list and current meta, with D-Fisher, Macrocosmos, and D-Shifter all not only at 3, but also popular choices this format. Dark Worlds can't really get off the ground, despite being such a cool deck. Shiranui are my copium pick, which is barely squeezing in the tier 6. My first argument is the card Ghost Meets Girl, a Mayakashi and Shiranui's Tale. Read this card. It just stops almost every deck from special summoning flat out. And then it has a good graveyard effect. Plus, between the Mayakashi Link 3 and all the new zombie support over the past year, Hire UwU are in a very good position to abuse this card or to be able to make decent plays without it. Mayakashi are very good, but not quite as decent as Hire UwU, so they've been left in the casual section of the tier list and will be covered in part 2. Here's my list for Hire UwU. This will probably be getting a deck profile in the future if I have time. General summary is Jacko Bolin and Zombie Return are amazing extenders. Hire UwU Squire is somehow a good starter now, and overall, Hire UwU just have very good traps for no real reason. Mutant is just top straight up. Surprisingly, Mutants are a sleeper deck with a ton of banish synergy. What really makes this deck decent is the card Mutant, which pulls out a free monster banish from the deck. Of course, banishing is the real reason Mutants are a decent deck right now. 3-dimensional Shifter, 3-dimensional Fisher, and 3 Macro Cosmos actively help the deck make plays, meaning this deck has a really good matchup in the Tearlaments. Now if you can go first. I'm not convinced this deck is strong rogue, but seeing a well thought out list like this one by Ethan Gattery makes me a very happy Mutant player. This list made top 4 at a WCQ regional and shows off an amazing budget option, basically just trying to get the banishes off on the opponent. Thanks for watching part 1 of my tier list update. I've tiered 9 of the 11 new archetypes that have been added to the game, and have updated most other archetypes that have seen changes on this list. Here, as you can see, is the old tier list for Despia format. And here you can see the new, fully updated tier list. I'm gonna let you decide whether or not these changes are a good or bad thing. In fact, that's what the comments are for. Leave a comment. I'm shilling. Call to action. Wow. Konami's most recent archetypes have all been very powerful. It's just a shame to see how Tearlaments are preventing most of them from being played. The same can be said with all of Konami's excellent legacy support. Cards like Rikka Con, Rainbow Vidge of Salvation, and the Dracoslayer cards are amazing and give me a lot of hope for the future of this game. More decks have climbed into the Rogue this format, and that's a good thing. Part 2 will go over all the chaos that has assaulted the low tiers. Casual Yu-Gi-Oh! Is bizarre in today's power-crept format. Engines at the top pull up engines at the bottom, even if they lift up very unevenly. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.